Day 2 of the 2021 CityJS conference is drawing to a close, but fear not folks, we have one amazing speaker left for you to enjoy before you head home, and this promises to be a very useful talk for many of us in the audience. Your final speaker of the Day 2 of the 2021 CityJS conference is Kelly from Indianapolis in the USA. Kelly is going to be exploring how you can build command line interfaces from scratch and tinker to build those tools which will save you a hell of a lot of time in the long run. You know us developers will spend 12 hours trying to automate something which takes 12 seconds, and this may well be one of those things, which is music to my ears, and I'm sure it is to yours too. There won't be a Q&A session after this talk, but we're sure if you post on Twitter using the hashtag CityJS2021, Kelly will find your questions and hopefully give you some answers. Please do keep all of the posts coming in across all social medias and in the comments section wherever you are watching along. Kelly, it is time to hand the stage over to you.
Hey everybody, welcome. Boy, I'm super glad that everybody was able to stick with me here and hang out for the time we have together today. Sorry about the little technical difficulties. I remember one time I had a presentation where I showed up and my entire USB ports were completely fried, so I couldn't actually plug in to the overhead. So I ended up broadcasting to someone else's computer who then plugged in. So everything was a slight delay. It was super fun. Totally killed the same thing today with Zoom. My audio wasn't working. We have me on Meet. I'm getting piped in. We got it all worked out. The team here is amazing. I'm super sorry for the delay again, but we're all up and running. So let's get started about some CLI development. So before we jump in, I want to just kind of give you an overview of what we're going to do for the next couple hours here. So I've always felt that a solid understanding of anything requires some back to basics, right? So the first thing I want to do with a CLI in understanding how this whole thing operates and demystifying it for you is I want to talk about the history of it and where it comes from and where it got to today. Second, I want to go through some tools that I use. It would also be great, in the chat for you, if you have some specific CLI tools that you absolutely love, please share those around because I don't think there's enough people doing that, right? We all have our tools and we all kind of use them, but we don't necessarily share them around. So if you have some CLI tools that you absolutely love to use, do let us know. Then we'll go over the process of what it looks like to build your own CLI using frameworks or not frameworks, those kinds of things. We'll go over some of the best practices, talk about how things should work and how to be good CLI citizens. Then for the remainder of our time, I'll go through the code for the to-do CLI that I quickly wrote for an example. And then I'll show you how to add some other functionality to that, what the Oak Cliff framework looks like, specifically some of those pieces. And we'll just kind of go through and put some pieces together. And then, there's always time for you to check out your own code, pull this repo down, add to it, mess around with it, and learn all about how to develop a CLI. So that's kind of the lay of the land. That's what the idea is that we're going to be doing. But to tell the story right, I think I have to go to something that almost seems really almost unrelated, even a little obscure. So let's talk about the history. So many of you probably recognize this as stock tickers, right? Stock markets have this ticker that goes up, gives the symbol, gives the up or down, gives the amount, right? All that kind of stuff. Now, I know what you're all thinking, right? How does this even relate? Well, you'd be surprised because the stock ticker is more like, I don't know, a second cousin to the computer. Let me show you why. So the stock ticker was originally invented in 1869, and its sole purpose was for distributing stock prices uh, instantly across great distances, right? It was essentially just a simple machine that had a typewriter, really long wires, printed ticker tape, uh, and it would pass back and forth all the details you needed to know for the stock market to get that information in real time, so you could react to it in real time. Now, this was the mid 19th century, right? This isn't like earlier this year or a couple of years. Pretty neat, right? So this was essentially one client connected to another client, and they would pass data back and forth. So it did eventually evolve into that digital screen before, right? Everything's become more ASCII, it's all API driven, that kind of thing. But this is where it got its start. Now, one of the other things that it also evolved into, um, more importantly, even, was the teleprinter or teletypewriter, teletype. Now, this may look familiar. TTY, teletype, teleprinter. This is something you might have seen um, when you are, using any sort of tool with a CLI, um, which, by the way, is command line interface. So in case I missed that in the beginning, CLI does stand for command line interface. So that's a good level set that I missed the opportunity for. So let's go back to teleprinter here. So the teletype was a humble machine, but it did so much, um, not just for what we do as developers, but it's done so much and influenced so many people over a century or more, even really about the late 1800s. Um, it was starting to be used. Now these were very simple, and it was direct connection, one-to-one type thing. Um, but they would use it to send messages, right? They would use it to send all kinds of things as quickly as they could. It was essentially the first sort of text message writer, right? This is our first Facebook Messenger of sorts. It was used in wars at war times. It's used in aviation. It's used in military, right? I mean, all kinds of different places. And they all use what's called this telex network, right? So telex is the way that the phones connected to each other, so that all these machines could then operate together and communicate with each other. So type in your message. One message would it would send it to another one, print it out, and the other one would be able to respond back, type it in, and it would send it back to you. So telegrams like Western Union were actually sent this way for years until the internet took over. That was a major thing, was going and using this to send messages across the country, across the world even. And today, these networks actually still exist in a lot of places. So I know aviation still uses it. And a lot of the TDD, or telecommunication devices for the deaf, I believe it's still functional there. But over time, the teletype started to change, right? It had more demands. They needed more things to be transferred. Started to change its look a bit. So now it's starting to look more familiar, right? Now this doesn't look like a printer or a typewriter or an old stock ticker machine. This actually looks like an actual computer to me. Now, a lot of these terminals, as they were called, would connect to other machines, mainframes, computers that you could then connect to and run sequences and whatnot. But now, not only could users type, they could traverse the screen, right? You can't do that with a typewriter. They could join all kinds of networks. Modems now started to come into play, where you could actually connect these to modems, and the modem would then connect to another modem, which would connect to a different mainframe. Times were changing, and I think that's pretty cool. Then the microcomputer revolution began, and things like Multics came out. So around 1964, MIT Computation Center started working on operating systems, CLIs, as a replaceable piece in the whole OS. Multics was just one early example, and Runcom was developed by Louis Pouzin, who was, I probably butchered his name. It's French, forgive me. Was what it was what he called it was a shell. Runcom was a new shell, this a totally new concept, right? And this was not even 60 years ago, right? So this was 57 years ago. 57 years ago, we invented the concept of what's called a shell, which is basically it runs commands much like a programming language. So in reality, these shells have become the programming language of the operating system. What's interesting to note here is Runcom also gave us the term RC. And RC, as some of you may notice from many different places, is all over in development and in your like config files and that sort of thing. And what it means specifically is run commands. And it's typically used at the startup of any command. So you'll see these for all sorts of things, right? We have anytime you're storing some sort of credentials or configuration for, ESLint as an example, right? ESLint has an RC, although we're doing them in JSON now. Nonetheless, RC has been around for quite some time. So this is not a new thing, but now some of us actually know what that means, because not everybody knows, right? And I didn't know exactly where it came from, but it's great to learn it. So, all right. So what exactly does like shell? I've thrown out a lot of words, shell and users and all kinds of fun stuff. So what does all of this actually look like? There's three main components to the shell itself. And it's not technically to the shell itself, it's actually the computer. So I may have misworded that a bit, but the kernel is the main piece, right? That's sort of the hardware, that's all the operating system, and all those like low level pieces, sort of just, hanging out there waiting to be used. And then the outermost layer is applications, right? And we're all familiar with applications. Anytime a process runs, anytime you start something up, what that's doing is interacting with the kernel to start everything up, get it going, read the files, input, output, start the application, get it ready to go. And the way it does that is with the shell. And the reason why it does that is because that is that middle layer that gives you the programmability you need to actually function, get your app to actually function. So just sort of to complete full circle, you actually use a terminal now to eventually communicate with the kernel itself. The shell, that's just the programming language you do it with. But if we skip ahead a little bit, in 1971's, our lives would be forever altered. So this was the start of it. As that microcomputer, I almost forgot that I had a story here. So let me go back and tell you. One of my favorite movies as a kid was War Games. I don't know if any of you recognize this screen. It's Matthew Broderick, Ali Sheedy. If you've not watched War Games, you need to, because it really shows you what some of this stuff actually did. So the black box in the corner with the red and blue flips, the switches there, those are, that is an IMSAI 8080 microcomputer. They don't roll off the tongue like MacBook Pro anymore. So this was when in the movie he's actually dialing, it's like NORAD, He's breaking in and hacking some sort of. He wants to actually change grades, but he ends up inadvertently breaking um, into like secure U.S. security defense systems in NORAD or something like that. It's pretty wild, right? I think this was 1983, maybe 84. I could have looked that up, but I don't remember. It's just been forever. Watch the movie. Do me a favor. He literally is dialing a phone, putting it on there, typing it in, playing around. There's command line stuff all throughout it. This is how people used computers, right? This is how it was. Him even having that computer, I bet, was not cheap, right? I mean, at that point, that computer there was one of the smallest things that you could own. So the fact that they even made a movie like this was really fun. Definitely check it out, though. One of my favorites. All kinds of command line stuff in it. Super, super great. All right. So in 71, during this whole push forward, Unix was created, and it's the V6 shell came out, and that is basically not too far away from where we are today. So it's not changed drastically over the years, over the last 5 decades. Drink of water. Give me 1 second. Okay, so the V6 shell. We'll go back to that. Now, the V6 shell brought us down the right path, but eventually that was replaced by other shells. The Bourne shell, Bourne, Bourne shell was out there, and that's given us most of the features we're on now. But there have been different forks over the years. Some of them you'll recognize. One is called Corn Shell, KSH. One is Almquist Shell, which is Ash. Then you have Born Again Shell, which is Bash, which I bet most of you probably know, or the new one Z Shell, newer one Z Shell, which is ZSH. By new, I mean new on the Macs. I guess it replaced Bash recently, so that one's out there. There's also other ones like Fish. Fish is a great shell, especially for beginners to Linux. It's in the command line. It's got a lot of great functionality to it, all kinds of good aliasing tools, and it's just fun to use. So by all means, check that one out. So the one thing about war games that I do remember is they weren't necessarily using. They were not necessarily using shell commands. What they were using was more DOS, which is kind of like a shell, but it's now things are starting to change. Right, the late 80s, the 90s were coming around. We're moving away from CLIs, having to use a command line interface to use a computer, right? The computer is becoming more and more consumer friendly. Until then, it was data people, it was programmers, developers, engineers, scientists, government, but now they're getting small, right? Now they're getting small enough to fit in my own home. So now things are changing to how do I make that easier to use? Because people didn't want to have to learn all the commands it took to run a computer. They wanted to see things and click. So that's where Windows started to come around. Mac followed suit, with their OS, also moving more towards Windows and less and away from a command line. I can remember in kindergarten typing and doing examples of BASIC, right? And I don't know if my kids have that. Although my kids have different things today, but they don't have that original command line experience. Things are just changed that much. That the differences to me are kind of sad. I miss BASIC. I miss things like that. But they're learning new things with really cool stuff as well. So yeah, but even though they have Windows and they have graphic user interfaces for the operating systems now, developers were still, developers and engineers and that sort of thing, system admins still using the command line all the time. because it's always there in the background ready for us when we need it. Because, I mean, as developers, we spend um, we spend a lot of time here, right? A lot of time. We're either installing packages or running tests or pushing to remote repositories, any one of those things. But these are now our terminals. They're ours, right? They're not the same as they're virtual terminals now, but it's the same thing. So it's no different than it was, you know, 150 years ago, um, when they first got started with teletype machines passing messages back and forth. It's just a lot. It's just a lot cooler now. Now we get to do it with our own machine. We get to see things change. It's all blazing fast, um, and pretty spectacular. So what other what other types of tasks do we tend to do? Where do we end up spending most of our time, like in a CLI? Well, I'm glad you asked. So HTTP Pi is just a fantastic resource. Curl is another one, but HTTP Pi is a little easier. It just says HTTP. It doesn't say curl. It's got less options. It's a little easier to look at. A little newer. Either one works, but if you are not comfortable using one like this, you really should work towards a goal of set for yourself to learn how to use one of these, because it can really change the way you see like internet traffic, right? Being able to call things. It also will help you pull down scripts that you can run directly into the CLI. You pipe those into Bash. I can show you that later. That's no big deal, but it's pretty fun. So all these sorts of things with HTTP. Now, what I love about HTTP, besides it just being an easy to use interface, its help menu is really simple to look at for me, right? So I've cut it down a little bit here for an example, but if you ever just do HTTP help, it will come up and give you a listing of all the different pieces, and it's so straightforward for me to use it, just because of the way the options are set up and the methods and the URLs. So you'll notice that it does mostly use flags, which is a great thing. So one of the big things you'll see a lot of is flags over arguments and positional arguments. So in this particular case, those options would be all flags, and then the method would be available to you as well to add, but it is optional. The only thing you really need is just HTTP URL, and it'll run. All right, so that's that one. Heroku. I like Heroku as testing applications, that sort of thing. So this is one I have spent quite a lot of time in. It's also the creator of, like the team that worked on the Heroku CLI built Oclif framework. So I use that a lot just as examples and looking through it just to understand how it works. The amount of functionality there is just impressive to be able to go through and do anything you need with your applications. Some of the other ones too are available, whose names like Versal and that sort of thing. There's other ones out there available for you. Like, don't think that I'm recommending just Heroku. Pretty much all of them have a command line tool that you can use, and they have also worked with the same sort of stuff as far as like best practices and keeping the help stuff there. So Heroku is a great one that I like to use. I also use Firebase a lot, in it all the time. But if you start to notice, these all sort of have the same consistent feeling of self-discovery, right? Now they all have typically some sort of documentation guide online. But the biggest thing with a command line tool is you have a manual right there, right? So you can always just add your help documentation right to the command line, and it's available to any developer at any time to find what they need to do. And that's a key component, is the help documentation goes with it to all CLIs. So in the comments, I'm going to flip over to the comments here. Do we have any of you? And there's a couple of questions. So, all right, give me 1 second. I'm going to look at some questions, and just think of your favorites if you want to like throw those in the chat or whatever. Yargs, yes, Yargs. We'll talk about that here in a minute. But Yargs is one of those. It's an argument processing tool. So I'll talk about that in a minute. There's a few of those. Gotcha. Okay. So let's talk about what make those things great and what other tools do to become pretty good CLI citizens, and how they can use their best practices. My son is going to soccer or track, so if you hear him screaming because he needs a mask, that's because that's my child. So welcome to my house briefly. All right, so let's talk about best practices. Big one is returning 0 on success. Right, so every CLI that has a successful call will exit with what's called a code 0, which is super important, which means other things can now rely on code 0 as being a success. So if they don't get a code 0, they may bail early because it's not, the previous call wasn't successful, kind of a thing. The CLI, or most command line like shells, I believe, also ditch on anything after 0 anyway. So an error will be anything else. Typically it's a 1, but it can be literally anything depending on if you have other valid reasons or codes you want to add to it. So as long as it's doing that, that means it's going to fit in with everything else and work. Now, this comes into play when you have, I mean, there's so many frameworks out there as far as just like tools and other stuff. Somebody suggested Dash is a great one. Dash is also a good one. I picked up another one with which I'll show you, but it's got I don't remember the name of it, but it helps my helps me customize my command line and everything, all my prompts. So that's a fun one as well. So okay, so let's look at the next one I got here. Argument parsing libs. There's so many things to do on the command line with flags and arguments that trying to do all of that yourself is a nightmare. That's where something like Yargs comes into play. There's several of those, like different styles and different names, and they all have different sort of like libraries and frameworks to them. But all they're meant to do is take the arguments and make them easier to understand. Otherwise, it's just a lot of like work and problems with that can arise, and they take care of so many things for you that not using it wouldn't be in your best interest. So Yargs is certainly one. There are some other ones. Just look up. You can Google for argument parsing lib or libraries or npm or any of that, but definitely find one of those. Now, there are bigger frameworks that also include those, like Oakcliff and others that have they have the argument parsing and the flag parsing built right into it, so it's even easier. So we'll show you that here in a second as well. So whenever you have arguments, if it has a default, provide it. Right? If I know that there's a default, I want to know what it is. I want to know that it's going to use a default if I don't use it, um, and not just either ignore it or fail, right? So if you have a standard name that you want to provide as a default to something, then you show that and you use that. Um, and those default values, come in handy a lot because then you can see as a user, you can kind of see what you need to provide and what kind of gets provided automatically. So there's a lot of good pieces towards that to that end. So definitely make sure if you have a default, put it in there. Quick help versus long help. So typically, if you're doing a function and you don't do it quite right, a lot of times the help screen might show up, or you don't put in the arguments. It'll print out what all the actual tool will do, and that sort of quick help is very useful. And just like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm not doing the right thing, so I don't know what I'm doing, right? And then there's like dash dash help, where things get a little more detailed, right? They start to explain a little more thoroughly things instead of just being a quick command, here's how this works. Um, it gives more information to help you use it, examples and deeper explanations of what the flags are for and that sort of thing. Now, this help documentation, like I said, is important because not everybody is going to be using this connected to an internet to be able to look at documentation elsewhere. They want to see it right there. A lot of the stuff that comes loaded on machines now don't even really have like websites, right? They may not even have a website necessarily. Uh, being able to look things up and getting help documentation. Now, manual pages are kind of a thing of the past. They still show up, but not as often. Um, but you do still see them. It's not as important as it used to be. The biggest thing when you develop your own CLI tool is just make sure someone can go in, someone can look around, and just by typing in help, they can discover how to use it, right? So if you haven't at least kind of crossed that benchmark, figure out what you can add to descriptions or examples that might help them along the way. That way they can at least, figure out from there what you can do as opposed to having to leave the terminal and go somewhere else. So standard out and standard error are your two main output channels. Um, Standard out is basically when everything is a success. If everything is going well, do it there. Standard error is where you want to put anything else like warnings, infos, errors, that sort of thing. That way, it sort of keeps those two things separate, and also the logging works better that way because standard error will automatically log some stuff too. Um, so both of those things are kind of good. So, but using something like Oclif, it sort of knows where it goes anyways. Standard out typically is just going to be like console.log anyhow. So nothing too strenuous. All right, let me pop in the chat real quick here. Yeah. So somebody asked command dash dash help or command help, as many as you can, right? So you could do help dash dash help dash H, like anything that will allow them to do something without doing something inadvertently. So if it's like publish and you do, not saying I've done this before, npm publish wrong thing, right? Or any sort of thing like that can be catastrophic. So if you have something with like npm publish help, I don't want to publish something and then now it's suddenly tagged help or something weird like that. Like I wouldn't expect that. So I think whenever I type the word help in some manner, um, unless it's like in a string of something else, but like if it's help dash H. The nice thing is you want to provide, for most commands, you want to try to provide like a full version and a short version if you can, especially the common ones like help. So easy just to have a dash H in there for it too. That way you can kind of get both of those things. But okay, so let's talk a bit more about actually scripting just with script files, right? So you can do a lot with just Node or Bash without even writing a command line tool. Just use a script, right? Um, okay, so all you have to do is this what's called a shebang. It's the pound sign and exclamation point, and then you provide whatever environment it's going to run in, right? So if you want to run something in Node, you write a Node file, and then you can make that an executable at that point. You can also use just straight Bash. One of my things that I built a while back was something to install all of my software, just an installation script, all with like dot files and updates, so I could move from one computer to the other and had everything all backed up. I've since simplified everything, but it was a lot of fun. I could back everything up on my command line tool and export it out, and then push it up to GitHub, and then go to my other machine, pull it down, and then just run the script, and everything would install, and it would be a mirror image of the one I was currently using. So if you haven't done a project like that, I recommend trying that out because it's a lot of fun just to sort of understand how things are installed and how to bypass things and just sort of work through those pieces. Um, if you're building a bigger project, I wouldn't necessarily recommend going this route because it can be a lot more work. And I'll show you a little bit why with the example, but there's just a lot of effort, right? I mean, and some people still do it, and that's fine. But there's other frameworks that will help you get there a little quicker and do things a little simpler. And not have to struggle with learning a lot of new techniques on how to work with a command line. There's a lot of ins and outs, but we'll cover how to get through all that here shortly. All right, so let's look at. Yep. Okay, so this is what coding with a framework sort of looks like. Not exactly, but partially. I mean, this is exactly what Oakcliff looks like, but not all of them are made equal. But this one, if you notice, this is just a real simple hello command that you would type in. You would type, well, it's a multi, I'll get to that here in a second as well. So it's a multiple command interface, but this, you would write example multi-ts, which is the bin command that it would run, and then you type in hello, and it would say hello world back. And you can kind of see here the flags. So the flags have a help. You're going to bring in a name flag, and you can bring in a force flag. Each of those now are in the run file, in the run method, will show you how the args and flags get parsed. And then if there isn't a name, it spits out world. In this example, there was no name, so it just used world. But if you were to do hello dash dash name and then put Kelly, it would say hello Kelly. And then they have this like force thing just to show you how force works and some of the different flag types. So the flags for Oakcliff have all different sorts of types that you would need, but string and Boolean are kind of the common ones. Number would be another one. Okay, so let's keep enough talking, right? I've talked for a while now, so let's see where we're at. All right, cool. Everybody with me so far? How we doing? Any questions in the chat? I don't know. We'll see if we'll see if Node crashes for me here, Joan. We'll see if it does it here. So let me here, let me back out of this and go here. All right, so this is my VS Code. Not much different than anybody else's VS Code. But I got Zish up here in the shell as the shell, and then my terminal is here, and this is my super awesome new command line. I don't know, it's kind of fun. I'm still playing with it. And if I go into file, open recent, it's called Starship, and they have all these different ways of sort of spitting out, different information. If you want to know Node, if you're in a Ruby project, it'll show the Ruby version, and you don't have to like switch it every single time. So it kind of makes it fun. All right. So I'm on a tight real estate here, so I'm trying to make sure I don't mess up my stuff. All right. All right, I need to zoom in just a little bit here, which is going to run me out of room. So let me move this to bottom. All right. All right, so let's go through the first example. So I had we had tweeted out, I have an example to do CLI, and it's out there for you to download and check out. So up here is a shebang, and just to clarify on that a bit, it's so it's actually discovering the interpreter used to run a script. So I kind of misspoke earlier. You make it an executable by changing the file using what's called using chmod, which will change. I think it changes the mode. Change mode, and that will allow you to make it executable like this. So it will essentially change it. So now the file is runnable. The way that I'm doing it, which is slightly cheating, is I have this in a bin folder, and now I can actually do npm install globally dot, and now that will actually use this piece of information here to tell me that my bin is to do. So if I hit that, it'll go through the same thing. What that now does is sets up a symlink between to do CLI folder on my machine and where my node modules are globally. So now if I run to do, it shows you that there's some stuff in there. All right, so this is all random stuff. It's actually getting put into a text file, and probably running some other things too. I think I may have some dirty, I may have some dirty stuff here. Hang on one second. Let me delete you. Delete you. So let's run npm install, and then that should be, yeah. So it's getting it from somewhere else at the moment. It may be coming from both of them, to be honest with you. Okay, we'll skip over that for now. Let me show you why this is working. Sort of working. So the file system here is, and the path, which are both just basic node modules that come in. We are looking for a specific file called todos.txt. Oh, I know why it is. It's grabbing it from a completely different place. It's grabbing it from right here. Here are my to-dos. This is a little different. Okay, so here we go. So here's all the to-dos and why they're coming up in the terminal like that. Okay, so it's looking for this particular file, which is just running next to this particular script. Okay, so the script reads the file, splits it up, and then it says if there's no args, just show it And then if there is, make new ones and spit something out. So if I go in and I make a new one, I can do to do testing one new to do created, right? And if I go to my to-dos file, it just gets appended to the string. Now this is not very robust. This is just pretty straightforward, right? But it's a good example of how just using Node.js, I can write a script and do anything I need it to do. Just using a shebang to make sure it runs it in the Node environment. So you can do it either way. You can install it as a local npm package globally as well with the bin in there. So let me show you that one more time. So we go back to the package JSON. There is a bin property on the package that will allow you to do this. All right. So now we have to do running, and it is able to store things in this text file, and it was able to update them, add new ones, and retrieve it and show it. Not a whole lot of functionality, and it's pretty bare bones right now, but it does give us something to start with. Now, if I want to move forward a little bit, let's say we introduce something different. Let's say we introduce something like Oakcliff. Now, Oakcliff, as it has a terminal command tool of its own. Let's look at that real quick. So this is what I mean by self-discoverable. I'm able to type Oakcliff, tells me I can create my own CLI, gives me the commands I can write, and what those commands do. Now, if I want to look a little further, I can actually go directly into that and do Oakcliff. We'll do command help. All right. So my usage here is Oakcliff command name, which is basically the name of the command. And then defaults for every setting, just use defaults or force overwrite of existing files. So it'll ask you a bunch of questions, and actually I think it just asks you like one or two. And then you can just force those to be the defaults, which is pretty straightforward. Or you can force it to just overwrite everything that's there, because I think the question it asks you is, something exists, you want to overwrite it. And then I think the default is no, and you'd have to type yes. So if you force it, you don't have to type it. That's how that works. So see how all these things work together. There's one argument, 1, 2 max, I think is about the extent of it. Anything further than that, it's just going to be too much. So okay, so let's talk about what this looks like after I move it to Oakcliff. So I'm going to skip ahead in time a little bit and check out tags. And that was on my notes. Oakcliff move. All right. Now I got to go back. Hang on. Oh, now I'm going to do, let's see, get status. Get, check out. I'm going to cheat. That's what I'm doing. Cheating. Okay. And you can just delete. And that should return you back to normal. Yeah, cool. Get checkout tags. Move. There. All right. So now some things have added to the file, which is spectacular, right? So now we have all kinds of cool stuff to look at. So in this particular instance, we've now moved over to Oakcliff. And Oak Cliff has added some fun stuff here. So let's look at the package JSON first. It gets a little bit bigger, and there's all kinds of fun stuff that it adds here. TypeScript, TS Node. I'm doing this in TypeScript. There's also ways to do it in Java, JavaScript as well. So either way. And then it has this whole section for Oak Cliff here, where it takes where the commands are, any plugins, what the bin thing is, what the bin name is going to be. So in this case, to do. So what I'm trying to do is take that original node file and move it over so it will be ran in Oak Cliff. Now the commands here is that's a side effect of using what's called the multiple command option. So there's a couple of different ways. You can do it as a single command or a multiple command. So something like single command would be like HTTP, wrong window, HTTP help. So HTTP, okay, that one got really long. Hang on, HTTP. There we go. So this is the compressed version, long version. See, this is all best practices in example here. So with HTTP, you have URL, and it is one. There's no other command. It's HTTP, and that's it. Same thing with like curl, right? That's another good one. Same thing with like even something like ls, right? That lists everything in the directory. It's just a simple command that gets ran and does something, interacts with it. So something like Heroku, right? Now it has multiple commands, right? So now there's multiple pages of basically documentation here that you can go through. If you want to learn about how to do apps, you can do that. So there's all kinds of great stuff there to look at. But it handles all of this through this. Now the way to get started with this is you use their command line, and you can actually just build a whole new one right there. So you would run, let's see, well, let's look, right? Oak Cliff help. And we want to do either a multi or a single. So if I want a new single command CLI, I can do that. If I want a new multiple one, I can do that. And then the multiple one also will allow for plugins. So if you want to have non-core functionality be able to be created, ready to go, right? So you have all that sort of functionality taken care of and built in to help you out. So I won't go through the process of building it now because it's just messy. We can do it at the end if somebody wants me to, but what I will show you is this is basically what it's going to create. So in here, it will create a folders for source. This typically ends up being a hello command. So they use the hello as the example. I moved it over to add. This lib cannot be found. Missing something. Wonder where that going. Oh, you know what? It's I never actually installed everything again. My bad. There we go. All right, so now we should be able to use add. There it is. npm install works every time. Okay, so this one still a lot of the same stuff as before, but now instead of it being a Node.js file, currently it'll become a Node.js file eventually when it's exported and built. But now there's all kinds of great functionality that Oak Cliff gives us. So we get the help menu kind of out of the box. All the arg stuff is handled for us now. We don't have to worry about getting any of that or worrying about how that's going to work. And then it sets up, I mean, it sets up like a ESLint config, this ESconfig, all the basic files here to get you going. It will set up a simple test and all the test harnesses for you to start running. And it just kind of is fun to use. So this will add a specific class called add, right? And it gives me a description option for a static property, static examples. Now here, I want to do it to where I can actually just do here, I want to just do, I don't want to have like multiple flags or multiple arguments repeated, which you could do. So what I wanted to do was just like before, I can actually put just as many to-dos on one line as I want. You know, just put them in quotes and it should be fine. So this says, this trick will allow me to have an indeterminate amount of arguments. This is not something I would recommend on everything, but it works for this one. All right, so in run, it's pretty much exactly the same thing as it was before. Now there's a couple of new things that we get as well, which is the configuration file. Now the config in Oak Cliff allows us some really great info that I should just grab the site and walk through. So let's go to Oak Cliff real quick. And config. All right, so it's going to give you everything about the CLI that you needed to know and more. You can also blend this with your own custom configuration and import those pieces. You can add it to this config. You can update this config if they want to have like a something slightly different than this. They can use your specific configuration to override that. Tells you if it's, you know, what the user agent is, what the shell's being used, what commands they are, like all kinds of great stuff here. This object is pretty important because it allows you to do really fun things all across the entire the entire OS. So one of those things being like reading files. So I have a data directory that gets created. So whereas before I just stuck it in the bin file, said ship it with it. It wasn't important I do that. I just did it because I was lazy and it was easy. This will have more structure to it immediately, right? Now there is a .local file on my hard drive that allows me to store different configurations. This will be one of them. It will be in a to-do-CLI, which I have that in my workspace here. So I have a text and a JSON file. I'll get to the JSON file next, but now I have a text file which tells you here's all these. So, and as long as my npm install works, I'm going to do help. No. npm ig dot npm run package. Oh, 1 second. Free pack. One of these days I'll remember all these. Oh, there's 5 errors. That is not good. Oh, it's got it's missing one thing in the, excuse me 1 second, skip default lib check. Come on, work. Live code. This is it. Still not working. Well, that's a good question. Where's that at? That's still not skipping it. Well, let me see if I can skip this particular step because it should be, let's go to git check out. I'm going to have to do discard. Good times, good times. This is probably the hardest thing to demo. It's just trying to switch in and out of all this stuff. Sorry for that. Let's see. So I want to do and get check out tags init hook API. All right, cool. All right, so let's look at his ad a little bit more. Okay, so now, so you have to trust me, it worked. I'm not sure why it's not working now. Let me just make sure that this is going to work. Okay, cool. So let me show you what that does look like. So here's my help, right? I didn't even have, like, there's no effort here to make sure that worked. It's just make sure your documentation's right. Now you can focus on sort of the UX. I think that's one thing that people might mistake for is they look at a CLI tool as just scripting or that kind of thing, but it's really a user experience. And sometimes I think we forget that there's a user using it, you know. So definitely know that all of this sort of nice stuff and focusing on that experience is critical. So that should be pretty cool. All right, so let's look at the next thing. Okay, so what I did here, now that everything works, I can go in, I can do to do, I don't have list yet. I haven't done that yet on this step. So let me look at why this looks different. So I changed up a few things since the previous version. And the one thing I did was I didn't want to have to look for the file every single time, right? So I didn't want to, you know, if I'm in this one or another one, make sure that that file exists and make sure everything I'm going to do is going to work. I want to do that well before I even get to this point. I want to be able to do that with, I want to be able to do that without writing it either, right? So here, let's look at, there are hooks. There are specific hooks that you can create. There's an init, there is a pre-run and a post-run. All those kinds of things are usable. So the way that actually works for you is the init starts when it just gets, like when it's just warming up. So it'll run anything at that point. I find that's a good spot for things like checking for credentials or files or things in place, or if it's a first time run and you want to make a news experience for that, you can do that as well. The pre-run it'll know the command, but it's yet to run it. It's like found everything, but it's not started running it, so it'll do it there. And then post-run will happen immediately after it's completed its command and cleanup and everything. So I went with an initial one because I basically, whenever it starts, if that file doesn't exist, I want to make sure it exists. I don't want to ask them to create a new one or do anything else crazy. I just want to make it. So I wrote a function that just does check for to-dos file and gives the data directory, because that data directory doesn't exist on the first time it's ran. So all of these things I just moved into a helpers file. And then I used, now I'm moving to a JSON file. JSON wasn't critical here, but I thought it might be nice to show that you can do it with text or JSON. Either way, it doesn't really matter, right? You could do it with a database if you want to connect to it and ship it. It's not ideal, but you could. Also APIs, right? I write the one for the Vonage CLI. I write the Vonage CLI, and we have a new one that's coming up soon. But it will be, it checks for several things before it even gets started. And I forgot the point I was trying to make. I'm sorry. I'm a mess. All right, so let's look at this. Exists. I'm looking to see if the path actually exists. If it doesn't exist, it's going to create it. It's going to get the path. Oh, API. I was talking about this could actually call APIs too, right? I was going to do like a dad joke one. I always do dad jokes one, so I went with the to do because that's the other thing I do. I really only have two apps I ever make, and that's to dos and to dos and dad jokes. So I skipped the dad jokes. You're welcome. We're on. When I want to check for this, I basically want to make sure that that file exists, and if it doesn't, make it. And then if the actual file doesn't exist, make it with an empty to dos, right? So here's sort of my setup. And if something catastrophic happened, God forbid, and the to dos were blown away, it would just make a new one, right? I'm hoping if that happens, nobody's going to use this anyways. Let's not kid ourselves. And then get to dos, right? So before we were just opening the file and then spitting it out right there. I want to be able to do that in other places. So I made a helper file. Like none of this is super like, it's not like super complicated. What it is to me and what it was to me is just figuring out where things go, right? Because things are in a, it's very opinionated, right? You have to have things in very specific places. Otherwise it just doesn't work. So I have not yet in this step done save to dos, so I want to do that next. And that will be, I'm going to cheat again. Tags, list command. All right, so now we should be, now we have add, help, and list. So all of these things will now allow me to do different things. So if I do list, there's my list. And that is pulling just from my JSON folder, right? Now, since I made these helpers, they go, this is the wrong, what happened? Oh, that's bizarre. To do, get checkout. Hang on. Get checkout tags. Let me look at my list again real quick. No, get tag list. Get tag dash L. There it is. There it is. I did something silly. All right, quit. Get checkout tags list dash CMD. Everybody says, oh, come on. That is not right. Well, let's just go to main. Because I can walk through the changes there too. Oh no, this is not good. What is that? Oh, that is test. That's why. Source. Ah, fatal flaw. Sorry, y'all. Looking at the wrong folder. Okay, so get add, get lists. I thought I was just had a panic attack. I'm like, why are all my files missing? No, they were just in the wrong folder. All right, so for something like list, now all I have to do with that helper file is just do get to dos from my data directory and then run through and spit them out. So now I have get add, another to do. Oh, get, no, not get, to do, add, another to do. If anything, y'all are having some great entertainment tonight. Okay, so that tells me one new to do is created. So if I do to do list, another to do is on there. Yay! I don't have any way to delete or clear anything yet, which feels like my normal to do list, but everything's sort of working the way it was, right? Now, this is a bit heavy-handed, and I wouldn't say for a to-do list, this would be the smartest way to go about doing it. This was more for my example, but now, if we wanted to, we could actually go in and add, we can add some new stuff. So let's add a way to actually check things off, which I believe it's that one. So git stash apply. There we go. All right, so now I've gone in and updated a couple of things in the helpers, nothing too major, just added a delete because the way I wrote this was not very good. So I had to make two files to do the same write file, but at least now they're separated and I don't have to worry about them ever doing the wrong thing. And then I added a delete file, which is missing one installation, which I need to install right now. So I'm adding what's called prompts. Now prompts, and there's another one, Inquirer. There's a few other ones, I think, but those are the two main ones that I've had the most experience with and can speak to. This is where stuff starts to get cool, right? Because now what we're doing is instead of having to like handwrite a bunch of argument checks and all this kind of things, these will actually help us not only bring in the proper args from the command line, so that picks them up here. Now we can actually go through here and create various tools using prompt to build some stuff out. So in this one, I'm able to multi-select some to-do items. So if I go in and do to-do list and do to-do, delete, and now what prompt has given me is the ability to highlight an option, toggle it, toggle them all, and then complete my answers. So I can toggle them on and off. I can toggle one at a time and hit enter. And then I can do to-do lists, and they're gone. And all that's doing now is just in the JSON file. I'm hanging out with just an array. So it's really not much different than it was before either. But so this sort of puts everything into Oak Cliff in a way that allows us to very much build things out quickly. So I can add this to the overall package. Sorry, I have to talk. I don't know if anybody else, I have to talk through what I'm doing. Otherwise, I don't know what I'm doing. Delete method, delete command. Cool. So that gives me that. Now I can push that up. And I mean, I have a little basic to-do, a little to-do app that I can run. If I wanted to go a lot further, there's some other things I can do too, right? In list, right? Now list has just a basic listing. I could make this data become way more complex, right? I can do things like, let me think. I don't have anything planned at this part. So let me talk about if we do, so like a table, right? So one of the things that comes in with Oclif is the CLI UX. So let's see if I can import the CLI. I have to look that up real quick. Let's see. So Oclif also they do come built with quite a bit. So if we look at there's a CLI prompt. Here it is, CLI from UX. And all right, so CLI UX is a very similar tool to let's look at. Well, I don't have prompts anymore. So prompts npm, and we'll look at Inquirer. So both of these are able to just let you set up questions, right? And you want to have certain information. So let's say, I know what we can do. We can, um, if I don't, currently, if I don't have any arguments, I say, please provide to-dos. So what I can do here is I can actually make that, I can make it prompt me. All right, so instead of that, we want to do, that's not what I wanted, that's what I wanted. Yep, so, all right, so we want also to take this. So what it does is it's a method that is a promise that you want to call. And I will put that over here on add. I don't want multi-select, but what I do want to know is, I'll just call it title. And then make sure I've got the right question here. Yeah. So it's essentially like this. So this would be how you would run prompts without something like Oclif. You could basically just put it in something like this, run it immediately, and it would ask you everything. This allows me to put it into Oclif, and I can do type, text, message is the question. Okay. So I can do, I didn't actually get the code. Okay. Now you can add validation, all sorts of stuff. It's going to go through and make sure that every question gets answered exactly the way it does. One sort of weird thing that I haven't quite worked through is if you want to have prompts that also duplicate things like flags or arguments, well, flags, because you don't want more than a couple arguments, but if you have multiple flags and you want to use prompts to kind of take care of those, you end up having to sort of duplicate because prompts expects it one way. So there's got to be a better way to do that I haven't figured out, but getting the two of them to work together with something kind of complex is a little tricky at times. So let's do, oh, I did it as prompts here and prompt there. That's why. Okay, so why did I not? I see. Two different examples. All right, so that is, where'd it go? Am I in the wrong file again? Where am I? I'm sorry, y'all. This is getting a little dicey. All right, so it should be prompt. Yep. Okay, so let's do. Where am I like doing control? Okay, that's what I don't want anymore. And this is text. Name, we'll call it to-dos. Okay, what would you like to do? Okay, it's just deleting it. It's deleting it on save. Haha, hate that. Okay, so why is that? Oh, because response is not being used. So if I do, gotta be smarter than my machine. Why is this still? Version or on Rachel? Oh, that's because I got to take this out. That would make better sense. All right, then I'm going to do this. Why is it? Why does this hate me? Type in efficient reference initialize. So why did that work here and not there? What have I done? Oh, that's what it is. I am tired. Almost done. Almost. Long response. Okay. Whew. That was rough. Sorry. All right. So now it's just going to say what the response is. Not going to do anything with it yet. So if I do to do add, what would I like to do? I would like to try out prompts. Ta-da, just like that. Okay, so now comes in a little different than what it did before, so I would have to make some adjustments for it. But essentially, I can do is let's see. I just need to make to-dos a array with a string in it. So I think I do. That does not seem right. Response to-dos. Is that right? To-dos. Yeah, that should be right. And then save it with, let me just make sure that's going to work. Pretty sure it will, but something cool. And so then we need see. This is not what I would say ideal coding, but just know that it is. I'm just going to do one at a time. Know that it is for example only. All right, so let's see. Let's see if that works. Try something new. And it said nothing. That's not good. To-do list. Okay, so it added it, but it didn't respond with it. To-dos. No, I've got like, okay, where am I here? No, if our count equals 0, save to-dos. Everything working with the response. Everything but the response. Where is it? This.log. Wonder if it's something weird like that. There it goes. Okay. That did not work, right? Okay. I was making sure I wasn't crazy. All right, so that's it. So now I've added it like interactive mode, right? So that's sort of the fun part, I guess, about this is you get to really you can really use your imagination, right? You want to tell people what's going on at all times, be informative, provide help documentation, right? Just follow all the sort of best practices. I got some commenters, faithful commenters helping me through this one. So I really appreciate everybody's patience today. So at that point, everything here is the only thing I really have left is I want to um, put up my like sources link so you can kind of get an idea of some of those. And then I will also download this as a PDF and upload it into the repository as well. So here is my sources link. And then I have our chat window. I know y'all are like on a delay. Um, so I'm going to sit here and for a minute and then get some questions and then see how things go. Yeah. Yes. So how can you catch up with me later? So my Twitter handle is at Kelly J Andrews. Super easy way to grab me there. GitHub is fine. If you want to reach out to me there, say hi. My audio seems to not function with literally like anything but Google Meet right now. So there's tomorrow's project. So yeah, it's those two will be the easiest place to get a hold of me. We also have a Vonage Slack channel if you wanted to go there. That would be another one. I think we have a Discord one. I can get you that information as well. And you can follow Vonage Devs. They'll have other opportunities to get a hold of me too. But those are two easy ones. They're just on Twitter and GitHub would be the easiest ones for now. I'll just hang out in the chat here for a minute until someone tells me otherwise. All right. Well, I guess there are no other questions. I know it's also getting late in across the pond there. So I will go ahead and pull this down and get that out there. I'll add a couple more links there as well for the for like our Vonage community that you can find me there pretty easy. And then I'll get this PDF uploaded with the rest of the source code, um, and we'll tweet that out as well. But again, Kelly J Andrews on Twitter, Kelly J Andrews on GitHub. Just hit me up, let me know. I am really grateful for everyone's attention today and being able to hang out for the extra time it took to get started. Truly grateful for everything y'all have done. And I think we are I think we are all set. I have everyone have a great evening, and thank you again.
Kelly, what a fantastic talk. Thank you very much for delivering it as part of this year's conference. I'm sure everybody watching along at home took an awful lot away from that session. To show our love and appreciation, it is time for your round the world round of applause. Kelly's Q&A session will be starting over on GatherTown any moment now, so please do join us for that and put your questions to the man himself. If you are enjoying today's conference, please do let us know on social media using the hashtag CityJS2021, and as always, we love seeing your comments, so please do keep them rolling in wherever you are watching along. Once again, Kelly, thank you very much for being part of today's conference.